Brother und Sister, chapter 19. The brother and sister would be, said Austin and Vinny, as these early friendships flowed and ebbed. Brother Austin was perhaps Emily's greatest resource in temperament and taste. They were the closest in the family. Vinny, being not quite inside the ring, and stood together against father's, quote, real life world in the household. Emily's letters to Austin during his periods of teaching in Sunderland and Boston, and during his study at the Harvard Law School, show how much she did for him, how she worried about his health and spirits, and cheered on his courtship of Sue, but just how much he did for her and how sustaining a force he was on matters that troubled her most during these early years, and later can only be surmised. Certainly she depended on him for humor and gaiety about the house. Well, Austin, quote, well, Austin, she wrote at the end of a holiday, quote, you are gone, and the wheels roll slowly on. Nobody to laugh with, talk with, nobody down in the morning to make the fun for me. Or as on this occasion, she was making the breakfast for the family. Father, be it said, was not without humor. Once after he had once after they had all been mimicking a poor sermon, Emily wrote Austin, quote, I never heard father so funny. How did wish you were here. I knew you'd have died laughing. And Vinny was pert. But it was Austin who lifted her spirits during the general rejoicing in February 1852 over the successful funding of the proposed railroad. Father was proud and happy, but wrote Emily, quote, I miss your big hurrahs and the famous stir you make upon all such occasions. In spite of all of the innumerable diversions and warm friendship she enjoyed during the early 1850s. Are you listening? Are you close enough? The calls, the parties, the walks, the rides, the intimacy with her then dawdling Sue, she could write to Austin in April 1853, just as it was becoming clear that he and Sue were engaged to be married. I think we miss each other more every day that we grow older, for all, unlike most everyone, and are therefore more dependent on each other for delight. There are problems here, as in almost every one of Emily's important relationships, except for what Austin told Mabel Todd and the scraps about Emily he left in writing. The major source of information is his letters from Emily. The letters he wrote her, and with two minor exceptions, apparently went in the general conflagration. Furthermore, of the 86 she wrote him, 83 are from the early period between April 1842 and summer 1854, 2 years before his marriage, and 3 others about 1861, Thanksgiving, 1884, and about 1885 are sentence notes. One note includes a poem. It is hard to believe that these are all the letters she wrote to him, and it is equally hard to account for the almost complete absence of letters from the later years. There are obvious reasons why there should be fewer after 1854. Once just Austin had taken his law degree, July 19, 1854, and come home for good, and especially after he and Sue moved in next door, there are less need for them. But as Emily withdrew more and more from social life in Amherst, including Austin and Sue's, she depended increasingly on letters. 128 went to Sue from 1858. She wrote a lot of letters to Sue, dear, despite she lives next door. Maybe Sue's tough to communicate with. To be sure, Sue was often away from home, frequently on extended visits, but a great many of Emily's letters merely traversed the few hundred feet between the houses. Perhaps Emily and Austin renewed the long talks mentioned in the early letters, and so had no need to write, but it was Emily's way increasingly. One of the delights they shared of Emily's side of the correspondence may be taken as evidence, since was poking fun at men and things. Emily enjoyed playing, at least with subversion, a mild current of which runs through the correspondence. A letter from Mount Holyoke hopes, ironically, that Austin is gratified that I am so rapidly gaining correct ideas of female propriety and sedate deportment, and she herself is gratified at finding, quote, nothing which savored of rebellion or a subdued will, no dangerous sentiments. In a letter just received from him, February 1848, she boasts in the same letter just received from him, she boasts in the same letter thwarting Mrs. Lyon's edict against Valentines. Later, at home, she describes one of her father's visits, a Marsh, as a man of cares. I think he's for law and order. Making fun of father is a favorite sport in the letters. Father, the railroad, father at Jenny Lind's concert, father, and the amazing raw weather, father wagging his head profound. When no letter comes from Austin, father at the Kimberly's barn fire, and so on and on. No wonder she censored one of Austin's letters before reading it to father. I reviewed the contents hastily, striking out all suspicious places, and then very artlessly, unconsciously began. Another letter records going in from church, quote, very hot and faded, having witnessed a couple of baptisms, 3 missions to church, a supper of the Lord, and some other minor transaction times fails me to record, including the Reverend sermon. No doubt you can call to mind his eloquent addresses, his earnest look and gesture, his calls of now today to Austin, teaching school in Boston and facing a possible confrontation with the administration. She wrote, quote, if they raise the wind, why let it blow? There's nothing more excellent than a breeze now and then. Why let it blow? Aside from the sheer fun in all this, there are moral support, and the support was probably mutual. But it was Emily's way increasingly to write. When little Gilbert died, for instance, Emily wrote Sue several letters, one of them her greatest, but we have no written word from her to Austin. who was also almost prostrated in grief. The scarcity of surviving letters from Emily after the marriage is as mysterious as the fact that between 1851 and 1877 there is record of Emily's having sent him her quote, brother Pegasus, only 5 poems, while some 276 between 1853 and 1885 are supposed to have been sent to Sue. One suspects that many letters were destroyed, perhaps by Austen, as too intimate, or by Sue, who survived him by many years. You think Sue destroyed him or Austen did? The letters must be missing. Huh? All this intensifies our interest in the letters we do have. They reveal much about the day-to-day relationship between brother and sister. How she joked with him, worried about him, sent him fruit, mended his shirts and socks, asked him to do errands for her, kept him up on the town gossip, doings at home, tried out her style on him, compared with her other early correspondence. There is very little of the confessional in this one, at least in what remains of it. She is more outgoing, more reportorial, since it was her purpose to send him in faraway Sunderland or Boston or Cambridge as much of home as she could. She seldom gives way to her moods as she often did to Abril Root or Jane Humphreys. With only a few exceptions, she avoids the large subjects she discussed so intensely with the girls: religion, death, and the conduct of life. Perhaps she was keeping up a good front for Austen to cheer him up in what for a Dickinson was for a land. Perhaps he destroyed the more personal or somber letters. If he wrote her anything like the long, soul-searching letter he wrote Martha Gilbert in May 1852, nothing in her letters indicates such an unburdening. Still, the structure of the correspondence, its beginning, middle, and end, follows a pattern all too like the other correspondences of the early years. The flow, the seemingly inevitable ebb, in a sense, her own sense. Emily lost Austen to